The Isthmus of Panama has been famous for its canal for almost a century. For equally as long, Panama has drawn scientists to the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, or STRI, to unlock the secrets of the jungle in the little town of Gamboa. This tiny tropical paradise is home to a plethora of animals and plants. Scientists converge from all over the world to study everything: birds, flowers, monkeys, leafcutter ants, and bats. Bats, or Murciélagos, and the scientists who study them work for us while we are sleeping.
Groups interact and work together, but bats fill all these different ecological roles. They're seed dispersers, they pollinate flowers, they do huge amounts of insect control. So just looking at this group of bats in Texas, for instance, they're Mexican free-tailed bats, and they've actually quantified how much pest control this colony of bats does, and it's in the millions. It's huge. So there are all sorts of ecosystem services that are critical that bats do. There's also all kinds of other ecological niches they fill. Bats also eat blood. There are vampire bats. There's bats that eat bats. There's bats that eat birds. All kinds of little vertebrates. So they're across the board. There's all sorts of things that they do. But yeah, they're incredibly important in terms of maintaining an ecosystem and keeping an ecosystem going.
What are some of the stresses on bats?
Say habitat loss is one of the huge stresses on bats. So that if you look at the tropics, for instance, massive portions of the forest are disappearing all the time. And it seems like it affects different species of bats differently. Some do very well with human interactions, so they actually roost in buildings, and you see them in cities, and they take advantage of streetlights and the insects that come to streetlights. Others, however, are just being wiped out, so you don't find them at all anymore. Disease is a huge one that's affecting bats. So in North America, for instance, whole species are being lost due to white nose syndrome, and this is a fungal disease that is very poorly understood. So we're doing as much as we can to rapidly try and get a hold of what's going on and how it can be prevented. But meanwhile, masses upon masses of bats are being lost.
Yeah. Uroderma bilobatum.
The bat species that we're studying here is Uroderma bilobatum. It's Peter's tent-making bat. And they're called a tent-making bat because groups of animals find some palm trees, and they usually go and around this area. They go for palm trees that have palms with leaves that are big, like big fans. And what they do is they chew around the base of that fan, and then the leaf folds in on top of itself, so that the groups of animals can sit underneath inside of that palm leaf tent. And these tents last for maybe between 8 months, 12 months. So they're a really long-lasting house for them to make. And it's great because they can go and they can use big palm trees where they have multiple different leaves and just continue to make tents inside of those trees. But what these bats have done in Gamboa, and what is one of the things that makes them really interesting to study here, is that they've actually moved underneath the roofs of houses in Gamboa. Because of the really interesting canal architecture that we have here, the roofs come out at an angle here, and the bats really like to roost just underneath the base of the roof right next to the house. So we see really stable social groups here, which is a little bit unlike places like in Costa Rica, where I capture the same bats over and over and over again in these houses. So it seems that they really like to have a stable area where social groups can come together and they can interact with each other and stay with each other throughout the year.
And the other one is 72AA F51. It's a recapture. I think it's the adult male from Papa's house.
Okay.
Alright, so start flushing at 1911. I'm going to just use my phone number and with a bunch of figs, which is what they naturally eat. And when they've eaten some, we put them back in here.
So there's a lot of things that people can do to help bat conservation. I think one of the most important things is just understanding how important bats are in the ecosystem. And this is something that that 50 years ago, people were all about how do we kill bats as quickly as we possibly can. And there's a big group, Bat Conservation International, that has really turned things around in terms of people's perception of bats and whether or not they're vermin and pests, or if they're important players in the ecosystem and actually charismatic and interesting animals that deserve a lot of study. So that's one thing, just understanding them better and getting the public to think about them as important entities and not something to get rid of or kill. But then really things boil down to preserving habitat is critical for bats. Getting a handle on some of these crazy diseases that are wiping them out, that's also going to play a huge role. So there are a lot of direct things that people can do, but I would say education and changing public opinion is right up there.
Okay, ready? Mm-hmm. Okay.